Number 1. Cliff Burton. In the pantheon of heavy metal mythology, there are tragedies that sting. And then there is the open, unhealed wound of September 27, 1986. This is the story of the day the music didn't just die, it was crushed under the weight of a bus on a frozen road in Sweden. We are talking about Cliff Burton, the bassist for Metallica, a man who was not just a member of a band, but the soul of a musical revolution. He was the classically trained genius in bell-bottom jeans who taught his bandmates about harmony and melody, taking the raw aggression of thrash metal and elevating it into high art. With the release of Master of Puppets, Metallica was on the verge of conquering the world. They were young, they were invincible, and they were on the Damage Inc. tour, tearing through Europe with a ferocity that had never been seen before. But in a single, violent second, the momentum of the biggest metal band in history was halted by a patch of black ice and a cruel twist of fate that was decided by a simple deck of cards. We are investigating the 10 most heartbreaking vehicle disasters that silenced the icons of rock and roll forever. If you believe that the legends we lost on the road deserve to be remembered and their stories told with the respect they earned, please subscribe to this channel right now to join our community of investigators. And if you appreciate this deep dive into the history of music's darkest days, hit the like button to support the channel. To understand the tragedy of Cliff Burton, you have to understand the chaotic, unglamorous reality of touring in the 1980s. Metallica wasn't flying in private jets. They were cramming themselves into a tour bus, traversing the narrow, winding roads of Scandinavia. The bus was uncomfortable, the bunks were cramped, and the sleeping arrangements were a constant source of contention. On the night of September 26th, the band was traveling from Stockholm to Copenhagen. The mood was light, but the comfort was low. Cliff Burton and guitarist Kirk Hammett decided to settle the dispute over who would get the more comfortable bunk in the back of the bus with a game of cards. They drew high card wins. Kirk drew a 2. Cliff drew the Ace of Spades. It was the ultimate victory, a moment of triumph that would unknowingly seal his doom. Cliff looked at Kirk and said, "I want your bunk." Kirk, disappointed but honoring the bet, agreed to sleep in the front of the bus, while Cliff moved his gear to the back, settling into the best spot near the window for a good night's sleep. That simple game of chance, that single Ace of Spades, is the haunting detail that has plagued Kirk Hammett for nearly 40 years. If he had drawn a higher card, if he had won the bunk, the history of heavy metal would be fundamentally different. The bus rumbled into the night. It was cold, and the roads were slick. Around 6:45 in the morning, as the sun was just beginning to hint at the horizon near Ljungby, Sweden, the driver lost control. He would later claim he hit a patch of black ice, though others on the bus would dispute this, suggesting he fell asleep or was driving too fast. The bus began to skid. It drifted off the tarmac and into the grass. The driver overcorrected, and the massive vehicle violently flipped onto its side. Inside, it was a chaotic tumbler of bodies, gear, and glass. Because Cliff was sleeping in the preferred bunk, right next to the window, the force of the roll threw him through the glass. He was ejected from the vehicle. In a horrific, instantaneous tragedy, as the bus completed its roll, it landed on top of him. The weight of the vehicle crushed the 24-year-old prodigy, killing him instantly. The silence that followed the crash was broken by the screams of the survivors. James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, and Kirk Hammett scrambled out of the wreckage, dazed, bruised, and freezing in their underwear in the Swedish dawn. They did a house count. They realized Cliff was missing. When they saw his legs sticking out from under the bus, hope initially flared that he might just be trapped. but the stillness was absolute. A crane was called to lift the bus, a desperate attempt to save a friend. But as the crane lifted the vehicle, the cable snapped, dropping the bus back down onto the body. It was a moment of final brutal trauma, though the coroner later confirmed that Cliff had died upon the first impact. The scene on the side of that road was of utter devastation. James Hetfield, consumed by rage and grief, walked up and down the road in his socks, looking for the black ice the driver blamed. He screamed at the driver, "I don't see any ice. Where's the ice?" He threatened to kill him. The band was shattered. They had lost their teacher, their brother, their musical compass. Cliff Burton was the one who brought the musicality to Metallica. He was the one who wrote the harmonies for Orion. Without him, they were lost. The aftermath of the crash was a funeral of innocence. Orion, the instrumental masterpiece Cliff had composed, was played at his memorial. Metallica considered breaking up, convinced they couldn't go on without him, but Cliff's family urged them to continue, saying it's what he would have wanted. They eventually hired Jason Newsted, but the ghost of Cliff Burton hung over the band for decades. The surviving members dealt with the trauma in different ways, through alcohol, anger, and a hardening of their sound. But the what-ifs remained. This case forces us to confront the terrifying randomness of life. A card game decided who lived and who died. Do you believe in the concept of fate, that Cliff's time was simply up? Or is this just a horrific, senseless accident with no deeper meaning? I want to hear your thoughts on the fragility of life in the comments below. Cliff Burton's death remains the biggest what-if in metal history. He was a virtuoso who was just getting started, a man who played the bass like a lead instrument and lived life on his own terms. He died because he won a card game, proving that sometimes winning is the unluckiest thing that can ever happen to you. If this heartbreaking story of the metal god who was taken too soon left you stunned, please hit the like button, share this video with every Metallica fan you know, and make sure you are subscribed for part 2, where we will investigate the eerie filmed death of a pop icon in the jungles of Honduras.
Number 2. Lisa, Left Eye, Lopes. We leave the frozen roads of Scandinavia and travel to the lush, humid jungles of Honduras to witness a tragedy that was not only shocking in its suddenness, but haunting because the victims seemed to see it coming. This is the devastating story of Lisa Left Eye Lopes, the creative spark, the rebellious spirit, and the undeniable genius behind TLC, the best-selling American girl group of all time. Lisa was not just a rapper, she was a visionary who designed the group's image, wrote their biggest hits like Waterfalls, and pushed the boundaries of what a female pop star could be. She was crazy, sexy, cool, mostly crazy in the eyes of a media that obsessed over her burning down her boyfriend's house. But in reality, she was a deeply sensitive spiritual soul who was struggling to find peace in a life defined by chaos and noise. By 2002, Lisa had retreated from the music industry. She sought refuge in Honduras, a place she considered her spiritual home, where she underwent cleansing retreats with the controversial healer Dr. Sebi. She was there to film a documentary about her life, a raw, unfiltered look at her journey to find serenity. But that documentary would ultimately turn into a real-time horror movie, capturing the final days, the final hours, and the very final seconds of a legend who felt the cold breath of death on her neck long before the car actually crashed. This is the story of a premonition fulfilled, a vehicle rollover that silenced a generation's voice, and a camera that kept rolling when the world turned upside down. To understand the crash, you have to understand the mindset of Lisa Lopes in April 2002. She was on edge. She told her friends and the camera crew that she felt a dark spirit was chasing her, that death was trying to catch up. Just weeks before her own death, the van she was riding in struck and killed a 10-year-old Honduran boy named Baron Isel Fuentes Lopez. Lisa was devastated. She paid for the boy's funeral and medical bills, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the accident wasn't a coincidence. She famously told her camera crew, "The spirit that is chasing me killed him instead." She believed the spirit had made a mistake, taken the wrong Lopez, and that it would be coming back for her. It is a detail that adds a layer of supernatural dread to an already tragic event. On April 25, 2002, Lisa was behind the wheel of a Mitsubishi Montero SUV. She was driving from the jungle retreat to a nearby town, possibly to visit a zoo or get fruit. There were 7 people in the vehicle, including her sister and members of the R&B group Egypt. The mood was light. They were laughing, playing music, and passing around a box of Fruit Loops. Lisa was trying to relax, trying to outrun the shadow she felt over her shoulder. The road was a 2-lane highway, paved but narrow and unpredictable. The documentary footage, which was later released in the film The Last Days of Left Eye, captures the mundane beauty of the drive right before the catastrophe. Lisa is seen driving, holding a Coca-Cola, looking at the road. But then the situation changed in a heartbeat. A truck, or perhaps a slow-moving car, accounts vary, was ahead of her. Lisa pulled out into the left lane to pass. It was a standard maneuver, something done thousands of times a day. But as she accelerated to overtake the vehicle, she saw an oncoming truck barreling toward her in the opposite lane. She was trapped in the wrong lane with seconds to react. Lisa swerved the heavy SUV to the left to avoid a head-on collision. The wheels hit the gravel shoulder. She overcorrected, jerking the wheel back to the right. At that speed, the high center of gravity vehicle couldn't handle the violent shift. The Mitsubishi Montero began to roll. It flipped multiple times, a violent metal tumbler, tearing through the Honduran vegetation. Inside the car, it was a chaos of screaming passengers and shattering glass. Lisa, who was reportedly not wearing a seatbelt, was thrown from the vehicle. She was ejected through the window as the car rolled. The SUV eventually came to rest on its side in a cloud of dust and silence. The camera miraculously survived the impact. It captured the final seconds, the swerve, the scream, and then blackness. When the dust settled, the passengers, battered and bruised but alive, scrambled out of the wreckage. They frantically searched for Lisa. They found her lying in the grass distance away from the twisted metal of the Mitsubishi. She had suffered severe head and neck trauma. There was no blood on her face, just a small scratch, but the internal damage was catastrophic. She died instantly on the side of that road, the only person in the packed car to perish. The spirit she feared had finally caught her. The news of her death broke the hearts of millions. It was the end of TLC as we knew it. The group tried to continue, but the magic, the unpredictability, and the fire that Lisa brought were gone. This case is haunting because of the premonition. Lisa truly believed she was going to die young. Do you think this was a self-fulfilling prophecy where her anxiety affected her driving, or are there some people who are just tuned in to their own fate? I want to hear your thoughts on the mystery of intuition in the comments below. Lisa Lopes lived her life at full speed, breaking rules and breaking records, and she died the same way, ejected from a world that couldn't contain her energy. She remains the girl with a condom over her eye and the universe in her mind, lost to a swerve on a lonely road in Central America. If this eerie story of the pop icon who predicted her own tragic end left you stunned, please hit the like button, share this video with every 90s music fan you know, and make sure you are subscribed for part 3, where we will travel to London to uncover the car crash that killed the king of glam rock just weeks before his birthday.
Number 3. Mark Bolan. We travel across the Atlantic to the neon-soaked, glitter-covered streets of London in the 1970s to witness the death of the man who invented glam rock. A star who shone so brightly that he burned out before he even reached his 30th birthday. This is the tragic story of Mark Feld, known to the gods of rock and roll as Mark Bolan, the frontman of T-Rex. Before David Bowie put on the zigzag makeup, before Elton John wore the feathers, there was Mark. He was the electric warrior, a curly-haired cherub with a Les Paul guitar who brought sex, magic, and fantasy back to rock and roll with hits like Get It On, Bang a Gong, and 20th Century Boy. He was the biggest pop star in Britain since the Beatles, a phenomenon known as T-Rextasy. But beneath the glitter and the feather boas, Mark Bolan lived with a paralyzing, secret fear. He was terrified of cars. He had a premonition, a deep-seated psychological certainty that he would die in a car crash. Because of this phobia, despite his immense wealth and his fleet of luxury vehicles, he never learned to drive. He refused to get behind the wheel, believing that if he stayed in the passenger seat, he could cheat fate. But on a misty September night in southwest London, fate proved that it doesn't care who is driving, it only cares about the destination. This is the devastating account of a crash that happened less than a mile from his home, involving a car that was far too small for a star of his magnitude, and a tree
that would become the most famous and most tragic landmark in British rock history. To understand the cruelty of this accident, you have to look at where Mark was in 1977. The mania of the early 70s had faded, and punk rock was taking over. But unlike many of his peers who were deemed dinosaurs, Mark was embraced by the punks. He was making a comeback, hosting a TV show, touring with the Damned, and feeling revitalized. On the night of September 15, 1977, he had been out dining at Morton's Club in Mayfair with his girlfriend and the mother of his child, Gloria Jones. She was an American soul singer, the voice behind the original Tainted Love. They were a power couple, celebrating life. In the early hours of September 16th, they began the drive back to their home in East Sheen. They weren't in a Rolls-Royce or a limousine. They were in Gloria's purple Mini 1275 GT. It was a tiny, lightweight car, notoriously fun to drive, but offering little protection in a collision. Gloria was driving. Mark was in the passenger seat. They were traversing Barnes Common, a dark wooded stretch of road at twists through the suburbs. It was around 4 a.m. The road was quiet, but treacherous. As they approached a humpbacked bridge on Queen's Ride, disaster struck. The exact cause is still debated. Perhaps a tire blew out. Perhaps a wheel nut came loose. Or perhaps Gloria simply misjudged the curve in the dark. The Mini failed to navigate the bend. It careened off the road. It smashed through a steel-reinforced fence post, which did little to slow its momentum. And then it hit the tree. It was a massive, ancient sycamore tree standing just feet from the road. The impact was violent and absolute. The tiny Mini didn't just hit the tree, it seemed to wrap around it. The passenger side, where Mark was sitting, took the brunt of the force. The electric warrior, the man who had feared this exact moment his entire life, was killed instantly. He suffered catastrophic head injuries. He was 29 years old, forever freezing him as the youthful face of glam. Gloria Jones suffered a broken jaw and other injuries, but survived, waking up in the hospital to the news that the love of her life was gone. The scene of the crash became an instant shrine. The tree, now known as Bolan's rock tree, is still there today, adorned with ribbons, poems, and pictures left by fans who travel from all over the world to pay homage. The tragedy is compounded by the eerie lyrics Mark had written years earlier. In his song Solid Gold Easy Action, he sang, "Life is the same and it always will be, easy as picking foxes from a tree." The license plate of the Mini was FOX661L. It was a coincidence that sent shivers down the spines of his fans, fueling the legend that he was a mystic who knew his time was short. But the reality was harsher, a brilliant light extinguished by a momentary loss of control on a quiet road. This case is a haunting study in the power of fear. Mark Bolan spent his life avoiding the driver's seat to stay alive, only to die in the passenger seat. Do you believe that we can manifest our own fears, or was his phobia just a coincidence that makes a tragic accident seem like destiny? I want to hear your thoughts on this self-fulfilling prophecy in the comments below. Mark Bolan's death marked an end of an era in British music. He was the bridge between the hippies and the punks, a unifier who was loved by everyone from David Bowie to Johnny Rotten. He proved that you can be a 20th century boy, but you can't outrun the 21st century if the road runs out. He died as he lived, fast, flashy, and too young. If this heartbreaking story of the glam rock king who foresaw his own death left you stunned, please hit the like button, share this video with every classic rock fan you know, and make sure you are subscribed for Part 4, where we will travel to the American South to uncover the motorcycle crash that killed the founder of Southern rock.
Number 4. Dwayne Alman. We traveled deep into the humid heart of the American South, to Macon, Georgia, to witness the tragic snapping of the string that held the Alman Brothers band together. This is the devastating story of Dwayne Alman, a man known to his friends and fans simply as Sky Dog. To call him a guitarist is an insult. He was a musical conduit, a man who channeled a sound from the ether that was part blues, part jazz, and entirely spiritual. By 1971, at just 24 years old, he was widely considered the greatest slide guitar player who had ever lived. He had lent his genius to Eric Clapton for the Lila album. He had played behind Aretha Franklin and Wilson Pickett, and he had led his own band to the precipice of superstardom with the release of At Fillmore East, a live album that remains the gold standard of rock improvisation. Dwayne was the leader, the big brother, the driving force of a band that lived together, played together, and defined the sound of Southern rock. He was invincible, a long-haired hippie with a motorcycle who lived life at full throttle, believing that the road would always open up for him. But on a warm October afternoon, the road didn't open. It closed, suddenly and violently, in the form of a flatbed truck that turned a moment of freedom into a eulogy for a generation. We are investigating the 10 most heartbreaking vehicle disasters that silenced the icons of rock and roll forever. This case is particularly crushing because it wasn't just the death of a man. It was the death of a sound that was just beginning to change the world. The timeline of the tragedy takes us to October 29, 1971. The band was back in Macon, taking a break from the grueling road schedule, enjoying the success of their live album which had just gone gold. The mood was celebratory. It was a Friday afternoon. Dwayne Alman jumped on his favorite toy, a purple Harley-Davidson Sportster. He loved that bike. It was his escape, his freedom machine. He was heading from the big house, the band's communal home, to wish a happy birthday to the wife of the band's bassist, Barry Oakley. He was riding with his girlfriend Dixie, following in a car behind him. No, he was riding alone at that moment, though others were nearby. He was cruising down Hillcrest Avenue, the wind in his hair, the engine roaring beneath him. He wasn't speeding recklessly, he was just riding. As he approached the intersection of Bartlett Street, he saw a flatbed truck carrying a lumber crane approaching from the opposite direction. It was a mundane sight in a working-class town. But then the truck began to turn. The driver, apparently not seeing the motorcycle or misjudging the speed, made a left turn directly across Dwayne's path. The truck stopped mid-turn, blocking the entire intersection. The massive lumber crane on the back created an inescapable wall of steel. Dwayne Alman had seconds, perhaps milliseconds, to react. He was an experienced rider, but physics is unforgiving. He couldn't stop. He tried to swerve. He banked the Harley hard to the left, trying to navigate around the rear of the truck. He almost made it. But the truck was too long, and the gap was too small. The motorcycle clipped the back of the truck where the crane ball. The impact sent the bike into the air. Dwayne was thrown from the seat, but he wasn't thrown clear. In a horrific twist of momentum, the Harley-Davidson, a machine that weighed hundreds of pounds, landed directly on top of him. It skidded across the pavement with Dwayne pinned underneath, crushing his internal organs and dragging him for several feet before coming to a halt. The silence that followed the screeching of metal and rubber was absolute. Dwayne was alive when the ambulance arrived. He was conscious. He didn't look like a man who was dying. He had few external scratches, but inside, his body was shattered. He was rushed to the medical center of Central Georgia, where doctors fought for hours to repair his massive internal injuries, including a ruptured liver. But the damage was too severe. Skydog died on the operating table hours later. He was 24 years old. The news broke the heart of the South. The funeral was a who's who of the rock world, a somber gathering where the band played In Memory of Elizabeth Reed over the grave of their leader. The loss was incalculable. Dwayne wasn't just a member, he was the lightning rod. Without him, the band was adrift. But the tragedy of the Alman brothers wasn't over. It was just beginning.
The intersection of Hillcrest and Bartlett became a haunted ground, a place where the energy of the band seemed to curdle into a curse. This crash is often cited as the moment the 27 Club narrative shifted to the 24 Club for Southern rock. Do you think Dwayne Alman had reached his peak? Or was he on his way to becoming the American version of Harry Gendrix? Would the Allman Brothers have become the biggest band in the world if that truck hadn't turned? I want to hear your thoughts on his lost legacy in the comments below. Dwayne Allman's death proved that you can be a god on the fretboard, you can control the emotions of thousands with a single note, but on the asphalt, you are just flesh and bone against steel. He died chasing a melody he never got to finish, leaving behind a void that echoes in every slide guitar solo played since. If this heartbreaking story of the Southern rock king crushed by fate left you stunned, please hit the like button, share this video with every guitar player you know, and make sure you are subscribed for Part 5, where we will uncover the most chilling copycat tragedy in music history happening just blocks from Dwayne's crash.
Number 5. Barry Oakley. We remain in the haunted streets of Macon, Georgia, to witness a sequel to tragedy that is so eerie, so mathematically improbable, and so devastating that it birthed the legend of the Allman Brothers curse. This is the story of Raymond Barry Oakley III, the bass player who provided the melodic, thunderous foundation for the band. After the death of Dwayne Alman in 1971, Barry was a broken man. He wasn't just a bandmate, he was a disciple, a brother who had lost his leader. Friends and family reported that in the year following Dwayne's crash, Barry was a ghost of his former self, drinking heavily, losing weight, and consumed by a grief that felt like a heavy fog. He famously said that he didn't want to be here without Dwayne. Whether that was a cry for help or a dark premonition, the universe answered it in a way that defies all logic. On November 11, 1972, exactly 1 year and 13 days after Dwayne Alman died, Barry Oakley climbed onto his own motorcycle. It wasn't the same bike, but the machine was the same vessel of freedom and danger. He was riding a 1967 Triumph through the familiar streets of Macon, the city that had become a mausoleum for his best friend. He was 24 years old, the exact same age Dwayne was when he died, and he was riding toward an intersection that was just 3 blocks away from where Dwayne had been killed. We are investigating the 10 most heartbreaking vehicle disasters that silence the icons of rock and roll forever. This case is the most chilling on our list because it feels less like an accident and more like a cosmic echo, a replay of a nightmare that the band hadn't even finished mourning. The timeline of the crash is a mirror image of the previous tragedy. It was a Saturday afternoon. Barry was cruising down Napier Avenue. The air was crisp, the roads were busy. As he approached the intersection of Inverness Avenue, a city bus was navigating the turn. Just like with Dwayne and the flatbed truck, there was a miscalculation of space and time. The bus driver likely didn't see the motorcycle, or perhaps Barry, lost in thought or impaired by his grief, didn't react fast enough. The Triumph slammed into the side of the bus. It wasn't the crushing, pinning impact that killed Dwayne. It was a violent collision that threw Barry over the handlebars. He flew through the air and landed hard on the pavement, his helmet striking the ground. But here is the twist that makes this story so agonizingly different from Dwayne's. Barry Oakley didn't die on the street. He didn't lose consciousness. He stood up. In a state of shock and adrenaline, Barry dusted himself off. He refused medical treatment at the scene. He told the bus driver and the witnesses that he was fine, just shaken up. He famously declined to go to the hospital, perhaps terrified of hospitals after watching Dwayne die in one just a year prior. He got a ride home. He walked into his house, sat down, and tried to relax. He thought he had survived. He thought he was the lucky one. But inside his skull, a ticking bomb had been activated. The blood had caused a brain bleed, a condition known as an epidural hematoma. It is often called talk and die syndrome
because the victim appears lucid for a lucid interval, while the pressure builds silently inside the cranium. For hours, Barry Oakley sat in his house, talking to his friends, complaining of a headache that was slowly turning into a delirium. As the blood pooled, pressing against his brain, his behavior became erratic. He started talking nonsense. He became lethargic. By the time his friends realized that this wasn't just a headache, it was too late. They rushed him to the hospital, the same hospital where Dwayne had died. Doctors fought to save his life, but the pressure on his brain was massive. Barry Oakley slipped into a coma and died later that evening. The cause of death was a skull fracture and cerebral swelling. The devastation for the Alman Brothers band was absolute. They had lost their second brother in almost the exact same way, in almost the exact same place, at the exact same age. The coincidence was suffocating. It felt like the city of Macon was trying to kill them. Barry was buried in Rose Hill Cemetery, laid to rest directly next to Dwayne Alman. Today their graves are a pilgrimage site for rock fans, two brothers in arms, sleeping side by side for eternity, victims of the same cruel twist of fate. This case is the definition of a spooky coincidence. The proximity, the age, the method, it is almost statistically impossible. Do you believe in curses, or do you think Barry's grief made him reckless on the road, leading him to subconsciously recreate his friend's end? I want to hear your thoughts on this eerie parallel in the comments below. Barry Oakley's death marked the end of the original era of the Alman Brothers. They would continue, they would rebuild, but the magic of that first lineup was buried in the Georgia clay. He proved that sometimes you can walk away from the crash, but you can't walk away from the damage. He died thinking he was okay, a final tragedy for a man who just wanted to be with his friend. If this eerie story of the Alman Brothers curse left you stunned, please hit the like button, share this video with every classic rock fan you know, and make sure you are subscribed for Part 6, where we will leave the South and head to New York to investigate the folk rock legend who was killed in a fiery crash on the Long Island Expressway while on his way to a charity concert.
Number 6. Harry Chapin. We leave the haunted intersections of the South and travel north to the concrete veins of New York, specifically the Long Island Expressway, a stretch of highway known to locals as the Distress Way. This is the heartbreaking story of a man who was arguably the most generous soul in the history of American music. A folk rock legend who didn't just write songs, he wrote checks to end world hunger. His name was Harry Chapin. To the world, he is the voice behind Cats in the Cradle, the poignant, stinging anthem about a father who is too busy for his son, a song that has made millions of grown men cry in their cars. But Harry Chapin wasn't just a musician. He was a force of nature, a tireless philanthropist who performed more than half of his concerts for free, raising millions for charity while driving himself into the ground. He was the conscience of the industry, a man who believed that fame was a tool to be used for the greater good. But on a sweltering July afternoon in 1981, his crusade was cut short in a fiery collision that happened while he was doing exactly what he always did, driving to a free benefit concert to help someone else. This is the devastating account of a mechanical failure, a massive truck, and a fireball that consumed a legend, proving that karma does not always protect the righteous. We are investigating the 10 most heartbreaking vehicle disasters that silenced the icons of rock and roll forever. This case is particularly crushing because Harry Chapin died almost penniless, having given everything he had to others, driving a car that was barely roadworthy because he refused to spend money on himself. The tragedy unfolded on July 16, 1981. Harry was 38 years old. He was scheduled to perform a free concert that evening at Eisenhower Park in East Meadow, New York. It was a typical day for Harry, a man constantly in motion. He left his home in Huntington Bay shortly after noon. He wasn't driving a limousine or a sports car.
He was driving a 1975 Volkswagen Rabbit, a small, economical blue hatchback that had seen better days. He was known for being a terrible driver, a man whose mind was always racing with new ideas, new songs, and new causes, often at the expense of his attention to the road. But on this day, it wasn't his attention that failed. It was likely his car or his body. As he merged onto the Long Island Expressway near Jericho Turnpike, witnesses noticed something wrong. The Volkswagen, traveling in the left lane, the fast lane, began to slow down. It wasn't a gradual deceleration, it was a rapid loss of power. Harry put on his emergency flashers. The car slowed to about 15 miles per hour in a lane where traffic was moving at 65. He was a sitting duck in the middle of a high-speed artery. Behind him was a tractor-trailer owned by Supermarkets General, carrying a heavy load. The truck driver, Robert Etnier, saw the blue car slowing down. He tried to brake. He tried to swerve. But the laws of physics are unforgiving. A fully loaded semi-truck cannot stop on a dime. The truck slammed into the rear of the tiny Volkswagen. The impact was catastrophic. The Rabbit was crushed like an aluminum can. The force of the collision ruptured the fuel tank. Sparks from the metal scraping against the asphalt ignited the gasoline. The car didn't just crash, it exploded. It was engulfed in a ball of fire, spinning across the highway and coming to rest on the grassy median. The scene was a nightmare. Passers-by, including the truck driver who was horrified by what had happened, rushed to the burning vehicle. They tried to get the door open. One brave police officer burned his hands trying to cut the seatbelt. They eventually managed to pull Harry Chapin out of the inferno, dragging his body onto the grass. He was rushed by police helicopter to Nassau County Medical Center, but he was pronounced dead on arrival. The autopsy later revealed that Harry had suffered a cardiac arrest. It remains a subject of debate whether the heart attack happened before the crash, causing him to slow down, or if it was caused by the impact of the crash itself. Either way, the result was the same. The voice of the common man was silenced on the side of the road. The news devastated New York. Cats in the Cradle played on every station, its lyrics about not having enough time taking on a cruel, literal meaning. The irony of his death was overwhelming. He was on his way to give a free performance. He was driving a cheap car because he prioritized charity over luxury. His widow, Sandy, was later awarded $12 million in a negligence lawsuit against the trucking company, money that was immediately poured back into the Harry Chapin Foundation to continue his work. This case forces us to look at the sacrifices of altruism. Harry Chapin drove himself to exhaustion and drove a dangerous car to save money for the poor. Do you view his lifestyle as heroic selflessness, or was it a tragic neglect of his own safety that robbed his family of a father? I want to hear your thoughts on the cost of being a good man in the comments below. Harry Chapin's legacy is unique. He is the only rock star who is remembered as much for his hunger relief work as for his music. He proved that you can sell millions of records and still die a man of the people fighting traffic on the LIE. He was a troubadour who ran out of time, leaving behind a world that was a little less hungry because he lived and a lot more empty because he died. If this tear-jerking story of the philanthropist who gave until it literally killed him left you stunned, please hit the like button, share this video with every folk music fan you know, and make sure you are subscribed for Part 7, where we will investigate the drunk driving crash involving a Motley Crue member that killed a Finnish drummer and changed the laws of rock and roll.
Number 7. Razle. We travel back to the decadent, neon-drenched strip of Los Angeles in 1984, to the absolute peak of the hair metal explosion, to witness a tragedy that exposed the rot at the core of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. This is the heartbreaking story of Nicholas Dingley, known to the world simply as Razle. He was the drummer for the Finnish glam rock band Hanoi Rocks, A group that was widely considered the most influential band you've never heard of, the Sonic Architects, who laid the blueprint for Guns N' Roses and Poison. Razle was the heart and soul of the band, a charismatic, fun-loving British kid who had finally made it to America, ready to conquer the charts. But his American dream lasted only a few days before it was violently extinguished in the passenger seat of a sports car driven by one of the most famous men in rock history. This is the devastating account of a beer run that turned into a manslaughter charge, a crash that ended one band and permanently stained the legacy of another. We are investigating the 10 most heartbreaking vehicle disasters that silenced the icons of rock and roll forever. This case is particularly infuriating because it wasn't an accident born of weather or mechanical failure. It was born of pure, unfiltered arrogance and intoxication. We have covered Vince Neil as a criminal in previous videos, but today we focus on Razle, the victim, the man whose life was the price of a party that went on too long. To understand the crash, you have to understand the atmosphere of Redondo Beach in December 1984. Motley Crue was the biggest band in the world, and Vince Neil was their blonde-haired, party animal frontman. He was hosting a welcome party for Hanoi Rocks, who had just arrived in the U.S. for their first major tour. The booze was flowing, the drugs were plentiful, and the mood was invincible. But as the party raged, they ran out of vodka. It was a mundane problem with a lethal solution. Vince Neil, already heavily intoxicated, with a blood alcohol level way above the legal limit, decided to drive to the liquor store. He didn't call a cab, he grabbed the keys to his 1972 Di Tommaso Pantera. The Pantera is a beast of a car, a lightweight, mid-engine Italian sports car powered by a massive American Ford V8 engine. It is notoriously difficult to handle even when sober. Drunk, it is a missile. Razle, caught up in the fun and trusting his new friend, hopped into the passenger seat. He was 24 years old. He had everything to live for. He surely thought they were just going for a quick spin, a 5-minute trip to keep the good times rolling. He had no idea he was strapping himself into his own coffin. The drive was short and violent. Vince Neil tore out of his driveway and onto the winding residential streets. He was speeding, showing off, letting the V8 engine scream. But the roads were wet from a recent rain, and the Pantera's tires lost their grip. As they sped around a curve on the esplanade, Vince lost control. The car didn't just drift, it spun violently into oncoming traffic. It slammed broadside into a Volkswagen Beetle. The impact was catastrophic. The Pantera, low to the ground and flimsy by modern standards, disintegrated. Razle, sitting in the passenger seat, took the full force of the collision. The crash sent a shockwave through the quiet neighborhood, a sound of tearing metal and shattering glass that signaled the end of the party. When the dust settled, Vince Neil was miraculously alive, suffering only minor injuries. But Razle was gone. He had suffered massive head trauma and was pronounced dead at South Bay Hospital shortly after arrival. The tragedy didn't end there. The occupants of the Volkswagen, Lisa Hogan and Daniel Smith, were critically injured. They suffered traumatic brain injuries that would leave them with lifelong disabilities. In a split second, one man's drunk decision had killed a rock star and destroyed the lives of 2 innocent strangers. The aftermath was a grim reality check for the 80s rock scene. Hanoi Rocks was devastated. Without Razle, their chemistry was broken. They tried to continue, but the grief was too heavy. The band broke up shortly after, never achieving the American superstardom that was within their grasp. Razle became a martyr of the glam era, a symbol of the wastefulness of the lifestyle. Vince Neil was charged with vehicular manslaughter and driving under the influence. The legal outcome remains one of the most controversial in music history. Vince pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 30 days in jail, 5 years of probation, and ordered to pay $2.6 million in restitution to the victims. He served less than 20 days. He walked free, went back to Motley Crue, and sold millions more records. To many, it felt like he bought his way out of a murder. This case forces us to look at the disparity of justice. A man died, 2 people were permanently disabled, and the driver served less than a month in jail because he was a rich rock star. Do you believe justice was served in the death of Razle? Or is this a prime example of how wealth can insulate you from the consequences of your actions? I want to hear your verdict on the value of a life in the 80s in the comments below. Razle is buried in England, his tombstone marking a life cut short by someone else's recklessness. His death is a somber note in the flashy history of hair metal, a reminder that while the music was fun, the lifestyle had a body count. He was the drummer who never got to finish the song, the passenger who paid the toll for the driver's sins. If this infuriating story of a talent wasted by a drunk driving crash left you stunned, please hit the like button, share this video with every rock fan you know, and make sure you are subscribed for Part 8, where we will travel back to the birth of rock and roll to investigate the taxi crash that killed a pioneer and crippled another.
Number 8. Eddie Cochran. We travel further back in time, to the black and white newsreel era of 1960, to witness the tragic end of the first wave of rock and roll. This is the story of a crash that didn't just kill a man, it broke the heart of a generation and left a scar on the psyche of every British musician who would later conquer the world. This is the devastating account of the death of Eddie Cochran. At just 21 years old, Eddie was not just a star, he was the complete package. He was a handsome, charismatic innovator who wrote his own songs, played guitar with a ferocity that intimidated session pros, and produced his own tracks in the studio, a level of control that was unheard of in the 1950s. With anthems like Summertime Blues, Come On Everybody, and Something Else, he defined the teenage experience of rebellion and frustration. He was the bridge between Elvis Presley and the Beatles, a figure so influential that Paul McCartney famously auditioned for John Lennon by playing Eddie's song 20 Flight Rock. But while Eddie was conquering the charts, he was also living under a shadow. He was deeply affected by the death of his friends Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper just a year earlier. He had a premonition that he too would die young. On a winding English road in Wiltshire, that dark intuition became a terrifying reality in the back of a speeding taxi, proving that the rock and roll curse was not just a myth, but a physical force that seemed determined to wipe out the pioneers of the genre one by one. The timeline of the tragedy takes us to the end of a wildly successful, grueling tour of the United Kingdom. It was Easter Sunday, April 17, 1960. The tour, headlined by Eddie and his friend, the leather-clad rocker Gene Vincent, had been a sensation. British teenagers starved for authentic American rock had devoured every show. But the tour was over, and Eddie was homesick. He was desperate to get back to California, to see his family, and to get back in the studio. They had just played their final show at the Bristol Hippodrome. The plan was to take a train to London to catch a flight back to the U.S., but they missed the train. Impatient and exhausted, they made the decision that would seal their fate. They hired a private taxi to drive them through the night to London Airport, now Heathrow. The car was a cream-colored Ford Consul. Inside were 4 people: the driver, George Martin, the tour manager, Pat Tompkins, in the front seat, and in the back, crammed together, were Eddie Cochran, his fiancée and songwriter Sharon Sheeley, and Gene Vincent. The mood should have been celebratory, the relief of going home. But the atmosphere in the car was tense. The driver was reportedly driving too fast, speeding through the dark, narrow country roads of Chippenham. Around 11:50 p.m., the taxi was tearing along the A4 road at speeds estimated to be over 60 miles per hour in a 30 zone. The road was wet. As they approached a gentle curve on Rowden Hill, the driver lost control. A tire blew out, or perhaps he simply misjudged the road. The Ford Consul didn't just skid, it became a projectile. It spun violently out of control, careening off the pavement. The car slammed backward into a concrete lamppost. The impact was horrific. The lamppost didn't break, the car did.
The force of the collision was concentrated on the rear of the vehicle, exactly where the rock stars were sitting. In the split second before impact, realizing the crash was inevitable, Eddie Cochran performed a final act of heroism that defines his character. According to Sharon Sheely, Eddie threw his body over hers to shield her from the glass and metal. He saved her life, but in doing so, he exposed himself to the full violence of the crash. The impact threw him against a roof and the door pillar. The car door burst open, and Eddie was ejected onto the grassy verge, suffering catastrophic head injuries. The scene was one of utter devastation. Gene Vincent, who already suffered from a permanent leg injury, shattered his collarbone and ribs and re-injured his leg, leaving him with a limp and a painkiller addiction that would haunt him until his own early death. Sharon Sheely suffered a broken pelvis but survived thanks to Eddie's shield. The driver and tour manager walked away with minor injuries, but Eddie Cochran never regained consciousness. He was rushed to St. Martin's Hospital in Bath, but the damage to his brain was too severe. He died the next day, Easter Monday, at 4:10 p.m. He was 21 years old. The news devastated the music world. In Liverpool, a young George Harrison and Paul McCartney were heartbroken. The police investigation found the driver, George Martin, guilty of dangerous driving. He was fined £50 and disqualified from driving for 15 years. A £50 fine for the life of a legend. It was a judicial insult that enraged fans. This case is a heartbreaking example of the what-ifs of history. Eddie Cochran was a producer and a multi-instrumentalist who was years ahead of his time. Do you believe that if he had lived, he would have evolved into a producer star like Prince, or would he have been swept away by the British invasion he helped inspire? I want to hear your thoughts on his lost potential in the comments below. Eddie Cochran's guitar, a Gretsch 6120, was recovered from the crash site by a young police cadet named David Harmon. That cadet would later become Dave D of the band Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick, and Titch. He famously played the guitar in the station before returning it to Eddie's family, absorbing the mojo of the fallen idol. Eddie Cochran's death marked the definitive end of the 50s rock era. He was the last of the original Titans to fall, leaving the stage clear for the bands he influenced to take over the world. He died protecting the woman he loved, a final act of grace in a life defined by style. If this tragic story of the architect of rock and roll silenced by a speeding taxi left you stunned, please hit the like button, share this video with every music historian you know, and make sure you are subscribed for Part 9, where we will travel to the Dominican Republic to investigate the bus crash that killed the only rock star to ever rap in German and hit #1 in America.
Number 9. Falco. We move from the rainy roads of England to the sun-drenched, dusty highways of the Dominican Republic to witness the sudden, violent end of the man who's arguably the first global rap superstar to come from outside the English-speaking world. This is the story of Johann Razle, known to the charts and the history books as Falco. He was the Austrian genius who gave us Rock Me Amadeus, a song so catchy, so bizarre, and so brilliant that it became the first German-language song to hit #1 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100. He was a provocateur, a classically trained musician who reinvented himself as a new-wave rapper, blending Mozart with hip-hop in a way that no one else could. But by 1998, Falco was a man in exile. He had retreated to the Caribbean, living in a villa in Puerto Plata, trying to escape the pressures of fame, the Austrian press who hounded him, and the demons of alcohol and drug addiction that had plagued his career. He was planning a comeback, working on a new album titled Out of the Dark, but the title would prove to be a grim prophecy. On a hot February afternoon, Falco's attempt to drive out of the darkness ended in a collision with a bus that was as brutal as it was avoidable, silencing the voice of Vienna forever. We are investigating the 10 most heartbreaking vehicle disasters that silenced the icons of rock and roll. This case is particularly tragic because it happened just days before his 41st birthday, at a moment when he seemed ready to reclaim his throne. The crash occurred on February 6, 1998. Falco had spent the afternoon at a local disco called Tourist Disco. Witnesses reported he was drinking, but he wasn't causing trouble. He was just existing in the haze that had become his norm. Around 4:40 p.m., he got into his Mitsubishi Pajero, a rugged SUV that should have offered some protection. He was pulling out of the parking lot onto the main highway near the town of Villa Montellano. The road was straight, visibility was good, but the traffic in the Dominican Republic is notoriously fast and chaotic. As Falco pulled onto the road, he made a fatal error. He failed to see or perhaps misjudged the speed of a massive tour bus barreling down the highway. The bus was empty, traveling at high speed. The driver had no time to brake. The bus slammed into the driver's side of Falco's Mitsubishi. The impact was devastating. The SUV was crushed, spun around, and thrown into a field. Falco suffered massive head injuries and died instantly. The Amadeus of pop was gone before the dust even settled. The investigation was quick but controversial. The autopsy revealed that Falco had a blood alcohol level of 1.5 grams per liter and significant amounts of cocaine and marijuana in his system. The official report concluded that he was heavily intoxicated and impaired, which led to the error in judgment. However, fans and conspiracy theorists have long debated the suicide angle. Just weeks before the crash, Falco had allegedly told a friend, "I will die like James Dean." The lyrics of his unreleased song Out of the Dark included the line, "Must I die to live?" It fueled the idea that he had driven into the bus on purpose, a final dramatic exit for a man who lived for drama. But those closest to him denied it, insisting he was excited about his new music and his life. The bus driver was initially detained, but released after it was determined he could not have avoided the collision, given Falco's sudden entry onto the road. This case sits on the razor's edge between accident and intent. Do you believe Falco's death was a tragic result of addiction and impairment, or was there a subconscious desire to end it all in a blaze of glory? Does the James Dean quote change how you view the crash? I want to hear your theory on the death of the Austrian icon in the comments below. Falco was buried in Vienna in a grave shaped like a CD, a fitting monument for a man who lived for the charts. His death marked the end of a unique chapter in pop music. He proved that music has no language barrier, but he also proved that you can run to the other side of the world, but you cannot run away from yourself. He died in paradise, a lonely figure in a crushed car, leaving behind a legacy of hits and a final unanswered question about what really happened on that highway. If this tragic story of the international superstar who crashed in the Caribbean left you stunned, please hit the like button, share this video with every 80s music fan you know, and make sure you are subscribed for Part 10, the final and most high-speed chapter, where we will investigate the crash that killed a legendary drummer who was driving at 104 miles per hour while talking on the phone.
Number 10. Cozy Powell. We end our journey on the rain-slicked M4 motorway near Bristol, England, to witness the terrifying high-velocity end of a man who was the heartbeat of British hard rock. This is the story of Colin Flukes, known to the gods of thunder and the fans in the front row as Cozy Powell. He was not just a drummer, he was a mercenary of rhythm, a heavy-hitting virtuoso who sat behind the kick for the biggest bands on the planet. He played for Jeff Beck. He played for Rainbow. He played for Whitesnake. He played for Black Sabbath. He was the man you called when you needed power, precision, and a double bass kick that could rattle the rib cage of everyone in the stadium. But Cozy Powell had another addiction that rivaled his love for the drums: speed. He was a semi-professional race car driver, a man who lived his life in the fast lane, quite literally, addicted to the adrenaline of pushing machines to their absolute limit. He famously said, "I drive like I drum, madly." It was a quote that was meant to be a badge of honor, a testament to his rock and roll spirit. But on a dark, wet April night in 1998, it became his epitaph. This is the devastating account of a crash that happened at 104 miles per hour, a tragedy fueled by a heavy foot, a distracted mind, and a refusal to wear a seatbelt.
proving that even the most skilled drivers are no match for physics when the conditions turn against them. We have investigated 10 heartbreaking vehicle disasters. We end here because Cozy Powell's death was a preventable catastrophe, a collision that silenced one of the greatest drummers in history simply because he was in a rush. The timeline of the crash is a study in escalating danger. It was April 5, 1998. Cozy was 50 years old, but he showed no signs of slowing down. He had been in the studio recording with Fleetwood Mac founder Peter Green, proving he was still at the top of his game. Late that night, he decided to drive to the home of a married woman he was seeing, a decision that added a layer of urgency and perhaps distraction to his journey. He wasn't driving a tour bus. He was driving his Saab 9000, a Swedish car known for its safety and engineering, but also capable of serious speed. The weather was atrocious. It was raining heavily, the kind of British downpour that turns highways into rivers. Most drivers would have slowed down to a crawl. Cozy Powell did not. He was on the M4, heading toward Bristol. He was comfortable behind the wheel, perhaps too comfortable, relying on his racing skills to navigate the slick conditions. But he made a fatal error. He was on the phone. This was before strict hands-free laws, and Cozy was deep in conversation with his girlfriend, the very woman he was driving to see. He was distracted, emotional, and driving at speeds that were insane for the weather conditions. The data recorder and forensic analysis later revealed the terrifying truth. Cozy was traveling at approximately 104 miles per hour, in the rain, in the dark. As he approached a curve near the junction for Bristol, the laws of friction gave up. A rear tire famously blew out, or perhaps he simply hit a patch of standing water and hydroplaned. At 104 miles per hour, a blowout is a death sentence. The Saab 9000 lost all traction. It didn't just slide, it became a missile. It smashed into the central reservation barrier. The impact was violent enough to tear the car apart, but the car then rolled. It somersaulted down the highway. And here is the detail that makes this tragedy so frustrating. Cozy Powell was not wearing a seatbelt. As the car rolled, the man who had anchored the rhythm sections of the world's biggest bands was ejected through the windshield. He was thrown onto the asphalt. The girlfriend on the other end of the phone heard a loud bang, followed by a sickening static silence. She later told the inquest that his last words were simply, "Oh shit." It was the realization of a man who knew, in a split second, that he had pushed his luck too far. Emergency services arrived to find a scene of total destruction. Cozy Powell was pronounced dead at the scene. He had suffered massive head injuries. The inquest recorded a verdict of accidental death, citing the speed, the weather, the phone usage, and the lack of a seatbelt as contributing factors. It was a perfect storm of bad decisions made by a man who thought he was invincible. The rock world was shattered. Brian May of Queen, a close friend, was devastated. The drums for Black Sabbath fell silent. Cozy Powell had survived the excesses of the 70s and 80s, the drugs, the parties, and the touring, only to die on a highway because he was in a rush. This case is a chilling reminder of the dangers of distracted driving, a topic that is even more relevant today. Do you think Cozy's racing experience gave him a false sense of security, leading him to take risks a normal driver wouldn't? Is this a tragic accident or a case of reckless arrogance? I want to hear your thoughts on the fine line between confidence and carelessness in the comments below. Cozy Powell's death marked the end of a specific breed of rock drummer, the powerhouse, the showman, the thunder god. He lives on in the grooves of Dance with the Devil and Stargazer, but his physical presence was wiped out in a split second on the M4. He drove like he drummed, madly, and in the end, the madness caught up with him.
This concludes our deep dive into the 10 shocking car crashes that killed famous rock stars instantly. We have traveled from the icy roads of Sweden to the jungles of Honduras, from the highways of London to the streets of Los Angeles. We have seen that whether you are in a tour bus, a sports car, or a taxi, the road respects no one. If this series opened your eyes to the fragile history of music, please hit the like button, share this video with every music fan you know, and make sure you are subscribed and have the bell turned on. We have a massive new investigation starting next week that digs into the dark secrets of Hollywood's biggest child stars.